Thank you very much, Richard, for the introduction. And if I can get my PowerPoint slides, please, Nick. So as Richard mentioned, the HIV Legal Network is part of a civil society or a coalition that convened about a year ago in response to a lot of the federal developments that were happening around drug policy and wanting to create our own narrative about what drug decriminalization would mean for us, what an effective approach to drug policy would look like, and define those on our own terms. So in October 2020, we got together, convened by the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, to talk about drug policy. It started out as a 2 to 4 page vision that we hoped to develop, and it has since ballooned into quite something. And I'm going to talk about some of the features now. At the base of this mission is the idea that it is there's no point in and it's harmful to criminalize people for using drugs. It's an invasion of their liberty. It's an invasion of their human rights. And to address this human rights violation, there are 2 principles that underpin this draft civil society platform. The first is that we abolish all criminal and other laws and policies that control, stigmatize, pathologize, and punish people who use drugs, and redistribute those resources into other things that are far more helpful for people who use drugs, including access to a safe alternative source of drugs, greater access to health and harm reduction services, income and housing supports, and food security. So the key features of this draft civil society platform include, at its base, the full repeal of Section 4 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. And that's a section of the federal law that makes it a crime to personally possess controlled substances. The second piece of this includes also amendments to Section 5 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. That is the offense that criminalizes trafficking and possession for the purpose of the trafficking, and to permit the sharing and selling of limited quantities that do not exceed a set threshold. So we felt at the time that thresholds are really important because they serve, number one, as a guide to people who use drugs so they can govern their behavior accordingly. There is a notice about what is criminalized and not criminalized. It reduces police discretion, which we know is perpetuated in such a harmful way, especially towards historically marginalized communities, Black and other racialized communities. And it would also be a way to divert people from the criminal legal system at the first point. Of course, there are some issues with thresholds, which Caitlin mentioned when she was describing the Vancouver model, especially when it's not guided by the expertise of people who use drugs. So part of the civil society platform, what we articulated was that this threshold need to be defined by people who use drugs in a commission that revisits this issue periodically, so it reflects real world use. Number two, that thresholds need to serve as a floor and not a ceiling. So anything below the threshold is not considered an offense. Anything above the threshold still needs the burden of proof still falls on the prosecutor to prove that it was possession for the purpose of trafficking. Other key features of the draft civil society platform include the removal of all sanctions. So not just criminal offense, but all sanctions, including penalties, things like health assessments, dissuasion commissions. There's no confiscation of substances, paraphernalia, or medical supplies, no geographic drug use or personal contact restrictions or curfews, no drug treatment courts as a coercive alternative to criminal sanctions, or other coercive or involuntary treatment or other health interventions. And in the platform, we included a whole section on drug treatment courts because we know there's been a huge investment by the federal government in drug treatment courts and a commitment in the latest budget of more than $40 million for additional drug treatment courts. And this is a concern to many of the civil society groups that were part of this drafting of this platform as a potentially another coercive alternative. Other features of the draft civil society platform include the automatic expungement of previous convictions for simple drug possession and for trafficking substances below the set threshold quantities, as well as expungement of previous convictions for breaches of police undertakings, bail, probation, or parole conditions associated with charges for these acts. Also, we felt it was very important that the police had clear and strict rules about when they can stop, search, and investigate a person for drug possession. We were concerned about the notion of net widening and police potentially using, labeling people for possession for the purpose of trafficking, even despite the thresholds that were being defined. And as well, we didn't want police or other law enforcement to serve as gatekeepers or liaisons between people who use drugs and health services, which is something we've seen in other models, that police can be a pathway to a referral or health referral. And rather that those people are trained workers with lived experience and credibility and other frontline workers. Finally, another key feature of this draft civil society platform is the redistribution of resources into non-coercive, voluntary policies, programs, and services that protect and promote people's health and human rights, including health, education, housing, and social services that support people who use drugs and promote the safety and well-being of communities. So what are the next steps with this platform? A plan is to refine and finalize it, incorporating feedback from other reviewers, circulating it more broadly to organizations for endorsement, and using the statement and key features of the framework as a basis for our law reform efforts. One of the last things I wanted to highlight before I conclude is the removal of the criminal sanctions for possession and trafficking in limited quantities is a success in itself. And in any evaluation of drug decriminalization, we think that is a metric of success, even it doesn't necessarily lead to greater health outcomes for people who use drugs. That would be a wonderful added benefit, but removing the stigma of drug use, of criminal record, is in itself a metric of success. Thank you. I'll move it over to Garth now.